Louis Bayard is a best-selling historical fiction novelist and the author of The Pale Blue Eye, Jackie and Me, Courting Mr. Lincoln, Roosevelt's Beast, The School of Night, The Black Tower, Mr. Timothy, and Lucky Strikes, in addition to the book that we're here to hear about today, The Wilds. As the New York Times describes him, Mr. Bayard renders the past as if he'd witnessed it firsthand. He's a former instructor at George Washington University. He was the chair of the Penn Faulkner Awards and the author of the popular Downton Abbey recaps for the New York Times, for anyone who is a big fan of Downton Abbey. I know I was. His works have been translated into more than a dozen languages. The novel he's here to speak with us today is The Wilds, an account of Oscar Wilde's wife, Constance, and their two sons, leading up to and in the aftermath of Wilde's imprisonment for being gay in Victorian England. I really enjoyed reading this novel. I hope you do too. And here to moderate the conversation is John Williams. Thank you so much.
Is this on? This is on. Hi, everybody. I assume some of you have read The Wilds already. Those of you who haven't are in for a real treat. Do go and pick up a copy afterwards. Hi, Lou. Hi. Thanks for being here.
Anytime.
And I'm going to start with a slight detour, which is that in an hour I'm talking to Dave Barry, the humorist, back-to-back interviews, like some kind of elite athlete. And Dave, in his new memoir, talks about how authors' least favorite question is, where do you get your ideas? And he said they hate it so much that they have stock answers like Costco. And with you, I think a historical novelist, on the one hand, the answer is very easy. You get them from history. But I actually find that almost harder to believe than someone making something up whole cloth, because I'm curious, how do you decide when and where in history you want to work as a fiction writer?
I hate that question too, by the way.
I figured I'd start it, get it out of the way, the worst. All downhill.
So it's a lot of different things. It's just, it comes in the act of reading. I'll start asking a question. In the case of this book, it's like, whatever happened to Oscar Wilde's children? Because I didn't know that. I knew he had children. A lot of people don't know that he had a family, a wife and children. But I was wondering, whatever happened to them? And I started Googling, and I realized that there was no kind of fictional account of his family about what happened to them, and they're very sad stories. So I thought, so I'm always looking for the holes in history, the stuff that history doesn't tell us, the stories that didn't get told. And sometimes they revolve around famous people. So I wrote a book about Lincoln and his courtship of Mary Todd, and also his best friend, his close friendship with Joshua Speed. Again, because nobody had ever looked at them as a triangle before. These two very intense relationships happening at the same time. So I don't think I've answered the question, because I don't really know where the ideas come from. But it comes through reading and being curious, I guess.
No, that answers it. And it also implies that you are reading something that you then question. So I was also curious what role Oscar Wilde played. I know I've read that you're a huge Twain and Dickens fan from way back in the day, but what role did Oscar Wilde play in your life as a reader and thinker before you ever got to thinking about this novel?
Great question. I'm trying to think when he first impressed himself on me. A picture of Dorian Gray was probably the first thing I remember about him. But of course, as a gay man, he's sort of our great martyr, isn't he? The love that dare not speak its name. He's the one who kind of suffered for our sins, but also made us freer. And there's something quite liberating about reading his work even now. I think that's the reason he's lasted. And he feels so modern, is that he was always subverting the establishment, but in a deliciously witty way that allowed the establishment not to know what was happening. But so yeah, I think he was just part of that heritage, the LGBT heritage, for a long time. I also consider The Importance of Being Earnest the most perfect play ever written. It's a flawless farce. I assume most of you have seen it. So many high schools do it, which amazes me, because it's such high comedy that I don't know how a high school actress could bring it off. But
that's interesting. Yeah, I've never seen a high school troupe do it.
Yeah.
Would you do me a favor and just read the very first? There's a kind of prologue piece, but after that, there's one tiny bit of dialogue and then a full paragraph. And if you could just read that, and then
Sure.
I have a couple of questions based off of that to set the scene.
This is the very... Oh, yeah, so that first... Okay. Tell me if I've met this one, she says. To her mind, it is no different in weight or import to anything else she might say. She is living in the before times, before scandal, jail, exile, But how is she to know? Her eyes see only a late summer morning and a wife and husband on holiday, engaged in a late morning stroll, and on every side of them Norfolk, in the thick of its annual harvest. With an almost connoisseurial interest, she watches the wagons tottering from field to farm, the children taking shade in the hedgerows, the widows sifting through the holly and hawthorn and young oak for fallen wisps. Her own voice sounds no more substantive or pressing to her than the mechanical reapers and steam engines, and really it is only the faintest pricking of curiosity that moves her to speak at all, and she is only half listening for the reply. Tell me, she says, if I've met this one.
So the first thing, I promised you a craft question. So before I'm going to use that as a portal into the book and the plot and talking about that a bit. But first I want to know, because in reading that paragraph, I immediately thought of that famous painting, The Fall of Icarus, where everyone's kind of going about their business, and then in the middle of the frame, Icarus is plunging into the water. Because she notices this life around her, all these people doing all these other tasks, in the middle of this thing that's going to be a great drama for her. And I wonder how you start books and how you were envisioning that scene and why you wrote it that particular way, if you remember. We're going to talk about endings later, but this is just how do you get started?
That's a great question. I love that painting, by the way. Didn't Auden wrote a
Yes.
Musée de Beaux-Arts?
Musée de Beaux-Arts.
Yeah. But I hadn't thought about it, but that makes perfect sense. Yes. So backing up, I isolated this particular holiday because that was the day where everything the Wilde family started to unravel. Because that was when Oscar and Bosie, Lord Alfred Douglas, kind of consolidated their relationship, and everything kind of went from there. So I love this idea of, the original working title is Wildes in the Country. And I like the idea of them being on this holiday and just very relaxed. Everything's, as you say, going on around them. The life is happening around them, and there's nothing to fear. They're having a lovely time, and yet something is going to happen. So the reason it starts with, have I met this one, is because he's the stranger who comes to town. I think it was Tolstoy who said there are only two stories. You go on a trip or a stranger comes to town. That covers everything in all of literature. So he's the stranger, and everything will change once he's there. But yeah, I had them talking about something even more prosaic initially, but I thought, no, I need to get a little bit of dramatic tension in there. The question about who is this person who's coming, and why is he coming?
Well, she asks it kind of, now I'm thinking about it again, you've read it, that she asks it, it's hard to say how innocent it is as a question. Like, how much does she subconsciously wonder about these poets he keeps bringing around? And how much do you think she knows in that first moment before Lord Alfred Douglas shows up? Is this kind of a long-standing question in the back of her mind, or is she pretty innocent?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I can answer it. People wondered how, it's not clear when Constance first figured out that her husband was, had transitioned, shall we say, to homosexuality. But I think, and I don't think she has any conscious awareness of what's happening. I should say the young men, Oscar would bring home these young men to hang out with him, and he would almost always introduce them to his wife upstairs. So that was, I guess, his way of covering his tracks or what was going on.
Right.
So, right. If I'm actually introducing them to you, is your mic? Is your mic?
Is it okay?
No.
No, it's not.
Oh, we are technically.
I can shout if needed. I'm a loud family.
Yes, I can. I'll just.
I mean, was it a transition he made over time?
It was a transition. For the first 30 years of his life, Oscar was, for all intents and purposes, heterosexual. His primary romantic attachments were to people like Lily Langtry and Florence Balcom, who would later marry Bram Stoker. And that's where most of his energy did. He was initiated by his friend Robbie Ross. And once he walked through that door, he didn't look back. But I think one of the reasons Constance would have been slow to pick up on what was happening, and she's really almost agonizingly slow in this first act, is that there wasn't language to describe it. The word homosexuality, for instance, had just recently entered the language. So there wasn't a template for understanding it. There wasn't a lot of precedent for it.
Yeah.
So I think that's why she was a woman of her time.
And to also set the scene a little more for those who haven't read it, they've been married for 8 years. They have 2 young sons, and they're on vacation. And Oscar is working on a Woman of No Importance, a new play. And I guess another reason she might not have been incredibly suspicious is that he seemed to be a pretty doting father. He loved his boys, and he also loved her. I mean, how would you describe the way that he felt about her, and even as he started to live this new life?
Yeah, and one of the things that was clear to me after doing the research is that this was not a marriage of convenience. This was a love match, very much, and a passionate one, at least initially. The prologue that John alluded to earlier was an actual letter that Oscar wrote to Constance in the early years of their marriage, and talks that he's missing her from somewhere afar. And it's a very passionate and convincing love letter. This is not a guy convincing himself that he's in love. This is the language of love. So that was one of the things I really wanted to get across, was that he was all in. He was a family man. He loved his children, and they adored him in return. So to me, the saddest part of the whole book is that this family, which dearly wanted to stay together, could not.
The first third of the book is taken up with that early scene where Constance slowly understands. There are a lot of sort of section capping, amazing conversations in this book, and the end of that first one is very powerful. But then you move away from that, and you follow the family after Lord Alfred Douglas has sort of imposed on Wilde to sue a newspaper for libel, and that's what eventually gets Wilde put in jail.
He sues the Marquess of Queensberry for libel.
He sues Marquess of Queensberry. And we spend a lot of time with the 2 sons, Cyril and Vivian. So how much did you know a lot less about them before you started writing the book than other characters, and what sources did you go to figure out their lives and how they lived after this incident?
Yeah, there's a lot less written about them. One of the great resources I had was a memoir that Vivian, his younger son, wrote much later in life. It came out in the early 50s, and it was called Son of Oscar Wilde, with his photograph, with Vivian's photograph on the cover. But it's an amazing resource. It's a great memoir. I recommend it to everybody. But it's an amazing resource because he has such vivid memories of his childhood, of Oscar and Constance and Lady Wilde, Oscar's mother, and with very concrete details. But he was the only Wilde family member to survive past World War I. So he was kind of the bearer of this very troubled legacy. He was, in effect, he married twice and then had a late-in-life son named Merlin, who is still alive, he's living somewhere in France. I couldn't recollect the name. It's got a lot of hyphens. And
it must be nice.
Exactly, and prepositions. So I sent him. I found his email address from a mutual friend and just sent him an email. I said, "Can I talk to you about your dad?" He was not used to being asked about his dad, because he himself is a Wilde scholar. In fact, he has another volume coming out of some kind of Wilde scholarship in the next year. But he was happy to just answer questions about him, and so. Yeah, one way or another, I got a handle on these 2 guys. Cyril was the one who didn't leave behind much of a paper trail.
How old is Merlin, roughly? The grandfather of...
Merlin is...
the grandson.
Grandson, 82?
Okay.
80, something like 82 or 83.
It's interesting you say that about Cyril, because I was going to mention that despite the fact that Vivian wrote the memoir and left more of a trail, Cyril actually is kind of more present in the book. Vivian, in the first section, has kind of been left behind, apparently, with whooping cough.
Yes.
Which leads to one very funny line about, I'll botch it, but you're very witty in this book, like Wilde, where she says, a man, it doesn't speak well of a man's virility if he can't evacuate his lungs upon first request, or something like that. And so he's off being sickly, and then later on, Cyril served in World War I, and we kind of visit that scene extendedly with him. So was Cyril more kind of you let your imagination gallop a little bit more with him rather than rely on history?
A little of both. Cyril was the one, I believe, who was most broken by the scandal. And I include 2 letters. I have these things called entr'actes between the acts, where I include actual historical documents, court testimony, and letters. And there are 2 letters he wrote, I think 2, where he talks about very clearly that he felt emasculated by his father's scandal, and that he had to prove his masculinity to himself and to the world. And how better to do that than by becoming a soldier, and committing acts of violence. So he ends up, Oscar Wilde's oldest son ends up as a sniper British sniper on the front lines. And it's just an astonishing arc that he took. But so much of it came from shame.
And he died in the war.
Died in the war, yes. Sniper's duel.
A sniper's duel. He, you paint him very convincingly and somewhat unflatteringly as having this big chip on his shoulder and being kind of mean-spirited toward other people, or thinking the worst of a couple of people who he comes across. One of whom is this other soldier he's sent to comfort as he's been shot in the neck, grazingly so, but grossly. I always look in the acknowledgments for possible hints to questions. Is Paul Bayard your brother?
Yes, he's my older
You
brother.
say the soldier that Cyril is sent to comfort is named Mandeville. And you say in the acknowledgement, just one sentence, Paul Bayard helped me figure out what was wrong with Mandeville.
What was wrong with Mandeville?
Are you willing to talk about that and what he helped you with?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a spoiler or not, but Mandeville is this soldier whom at first Cyril thinks is faking it just to get out of it. And that was a very common thing in the World War I trenches. They faked wounds, or they got deliberately gave themselves light wounds to get out of duty and get sent home. So that's what he thinks he has on his hands. And with this exaggerated sense of masculinity, he's full of contempt for this guy, and then they gradually realize that something is wrong with him. I was like, what? How quickly can he be taken? How can I kill him in the space of 2 or 3 hours or something like that? This is I used to be a mystery writer, and these are the kind of questions I used to ask myself all the time. So I called my brother and was like, so what about sepsis? He's like, no, I think sepsis would take a little longer, but if he bashed himself on the head, there'd be a brain bleed. That could happen kind of fast. I don't know if you remember Natasha Richardson.
Richardson, yeah.
Yeah, it's just from skiing. Yeah, and she went pretty quickly. So.
It's a fantastic scene.
Oh,
the drama of it, and the sort of you're put on your back heels more than once in terms of what's actually going on. At first, I actually thought Cyril was crazy and very mean-spirited, but there is a little twist in there.
No, he gets
absolves him of that.
No, I think he's just been scared away from human contact. He's been the family had to flee England in the wake of Oscar's scandal. They had to change their names, hide out the series of residences. The boys went to different schools so they wouldn't, reveal each other's secrets. And so I think he just got used to being alone in the world, and that just felt comfortable for him. And Sniper, that's a perfect job.
Because you said it was an international scandal. It wasn't just in England. It was you couldn't go anywhere without.
Yeah, no. In America, they knew about it everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
The second act, the subtitle is a novel in 5 acts, as in a play. And the second act opens in Italy, and Constance has changed her name and is living there, sort of under an assumed identity. You triggered something that I was going to ask about, but I'll move on. So Oscar is in this book a lot, but am I wrong in feeling like it's Constance's book? How do you feel about that as an idea?
I absolutely agree.
Okay.
I absolutely agree. She, to me, is the protagonist. She goes away for a bit, too, herself, but then returns in the 5th act, and I think of this as Constance's story. And one of the reasons I wanted to tell that story, I don't know if you saw the movie Wild with Stephen Fry.
Long time ago,
96, I want to say, or 92.
That's when I saw it.
Somewhere in the 90s. Jude Law as Lord Alfred, Vanessa Redgrave as Lady Wilde. Great cast. And Jennifer Ailey plays Constance, and she has literally nothing to do in this film, but looks sad at what's going on around her. She doesn't have much dialogue, any kind of inner life. So I thought, gosh, the more I read about her, the more interesting she became. She was a feminist reformer. She wanted to liberate women from their corsets. Can I get an amen from the women in the room? So she was substantial. She was a writer and editor herself, so I just thought this is a really interesting woman. She needs to have her own walk in the light.
Well, she definitely does in this book. What happens after Wilde? How long does Wilde spend in jail, and what happens after that? That's part of what influences the family so much and devastates them so much.
Sure. He was in jail. He was sentenced to 2 years, but I believe he was released a few months early. And of course, he was physically and spiritually, emotionally broken by this. This was hard manual labor, in essence. For a while, he was denied even pen and paper. And even when he was granted it, they took it back from him every day. So De Profundis was written there. There's this letter that he wrote to Lord Alfred full of rage, but also a weird kind of transcendence at the end of it. It's, I think, his most successful prose piece in some ways.
That's an incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you haven't read it, so he was writing it. So anyway, he was released. He was already in ill health. He had an inner ear infection that would, they think, eventually led to meningitis, which is how he died. So he was dead within 2 years in Paris. His famous last line was some version of either this wallpaper goes or I do. And so there was talk. There was talk about the family being reunited, but the problem was he wouldn't leave Bosie. He wouldn't, and so Constance kind of wouldn't let him see the boys. So that was the sticking point.
Right. So Lord Alfred Douglas, whose nickname was Bosie.
Bosie, yeah.
What was the appeal there?
You can Bosie?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the toughest one, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's the toughest character. If you even looking at history, it's hard to sympathize with him. He himself was never arrested or imprisoned. He got off scot-free. He sort of goaded Oscar to do the things that got him in prison, including suing Bosie's father, the Marquis of Queensberry. So, and then he did not have a particularly attractive afterlife either. He eventually married himself. They had a child. He converted to Catholicism, but he became a very sort of vicious writer and during the Edwardian era, and a virulent anti-Semite. He's a tough one to like. So my take on him was that he was the victim of an upbringing where he was alternately completely ignored and coddled, and that he was also. Alex Ross wrote a nice piece about him for the New Yorker, positioning him as a Arrested Development case, basically frozen in time by this scandal, so that in fact he became Oscar Wilde's mistress for the rest of his life. He was considered by some a talented, gifted poet. So,
how old was he roughly when this scandal happened? He was
just in his mid-20s.
Okay.
Yeah, he was young. Another interesting thing about their relationship, it was very intense, but it ceased to be sexual apparently within the first year. So the intensity didn't necessarily revolve around sex. It was just this incredibly codependent relationship that neither of them could quit.
Without spoiling anything at all, let's talk about the ending just a bit. Partly because I want to ask you, in preparing for this, I heard you tell someone that you didn't know that was how it was going to end, which really shocked me because it's a very powerful ending. And it also seems incredibly intentional. And what comes before it is definitely, interesting, but it doesn't feel like an ending. And so how did you, without really saying specifically what's in it, you kind of revisit the countryside vacation? How did you decide to do that?
You've already answered in a way, because what I'd written didn't feel like an ending. So it was always going to be in 4 acts, because that's how most of Oscar's plays were written, including A Woman of No Importance. They're all in 4 acts. Importance of Being Earnest is 3. That's the only one. And so I thought, okay, I'll get to 4 acts. I'll get to Vivian. I'll talk about Vivian. I created a sort of a reunion with Lord Alfred that didn't happen in real life. A lot of stuff in the book didn't happen, I should say. Lady Wilde wasn't actually there in Norfolk, but I just wanted her to be there. And so I got to the end of that. It's like, well, this is such a bummer to end here, and it's anticlimactic, and it's just sadness, and it doesn't. So it was then that, being a bear of very little brain, I realized it was a book about a family that wanted to be reunited. And so the 5th act was a kind of imaginative reunion that that Vivian uses to kind of recreate this family, and it's an alternative path, I guess, that they could have followed.
And the way you've talked about Constance, it's actually quite a believable, even despite the time, and a believable alternative path, given the way she thought and felt about things. I wanted to zoom out and talk a bit about just the craft of what you do on a book-by-book basis. You, in the same interview where you talked about the ending, you said the only reason to get excited about writing a book is if there's a chance it won't come off. And it was in response to a question which I had myself, and I didn't want to just repeat word for word, which is like, how do you have, you're a fantastically talented writer, but taking on sort of reimagining Oscar Wilde and having that kind of style and wit is a daunting thing. So tell me about how close do things come to not coming off sometimes, and did this book ever feel that way?
That's a really good question. Some books don't come off on the first attempt. I think The Pale Blue Eye actually went through a pretty heavy rewrite between the first and second drafts, and Roosevelt's Beast, the final was basically emerged from the ashes of the first draft. Jackie and Me had a heavy rewrite, so I'm not always clear at what I'm doing or what's going on, and I don't always know until I'm done. So I wish I were smarter.
Have you ever gotten pretty far into something that you scrapped?
Yes, two times now I've tried to write a witch novel. I had an ancestor, a direct ancestor, who was an accused witch in Hartford, Connecticut in 1666. It was 20 years before Salem. And she was Dutch. She came over with sort of Peter Stuyvesant and that. And I thought, well, this could be fun, a witch story. I have tried twice to get that off the ground. I can't do it. I can't find, and I can't find the voice. I can't find the voice. And without the voice, nothing can work. I used to tell my students, you can always fix plot. Plot is mechanical. You can move stuff around, get rid of stuff. But if the voice isn't there, if it's not stable, then nothing can live.
Yeah, stable and convincing. That's a tough combination. Yeah. One of the things that makes your work so impressive. You have written other things. You mentioned that you started out as a mystery writer, and I know that you've at least dabbled in nonfiction and ideas around nonfiction. But what is it about, you've now written several historical novels, and I wonder what is the profound pleasure in them that keeps you from saying, I'm going to write a book about a family in Boston in 1998, named Bob and Sarah.
Part of me wants to say the history is a lot more fun to be in these days than the present.
Touche.
There's a certain escapist impulse, I think, going on in that. But the thing is, the stuff that comes up is still around us. So the hatred that was visited on Oscar Wilde for acts of gross indecency is now being visited on trans people. So there's only so far we've come. So, but I don't know. I consider myself the accidental historical novelist. So I wanted to write a book about Tiny Tim. This was 20 years ago or something, and because he was the Dickens character I liked the least, I couldn't stand Tiny Tim. So I decided I want to write a book about him as an adult and just kind of mess him up and make him into somebody that I liked. But I thought to do that, then I have to do the research, and that initially intimidated me quite a bit. But once I got into it, I was like, this is actually pretty fun. I really enjoyed the challenge of reanimating these lost worlds, and you do it. In my experience, you do it through the stacks. I mean, I've visited, London, but Victorian London is gone. I've been to France, Paris, but post-Napoleonic Paris is gone. So you find it in the stacks. And sometimes the challenge is stopping the research and telling the story. And I never feel like I've done enough research. I never feel like I've done it. I learn enough to tell the story. I never become an expert. Some months ago, I interviewed Eric Larson at the Smithsonian, about his Civil War book. And my final question to him was, do you ever feel like you haven't done enough research? And he didn't even pause. He said, no. But I think we get there the same place, because his view was, I learn enough to tell, essentially the same thing. I learn enough to tell the story. So if I've been able to tell the story, then I've learned, ipso facto, I've learned enough. So.
Yeah, well, you need a little oxygen for your imagination to roam. I mean, you don't want to just be recreating history. You're not actually a historian. You are an
No, I am not a historian. In case that isn't clear, I'm a promiscuous
I have another question, and then we'll open it up, so think about what you want to ask Lou. Dialogue is important, I think very important in all historical fiction. It's also, like everything else we've been talking about, a very high degree of difficulty. And in this book, there's this one moment where Constance is talking to a family friend named Arthur, who has expressed his love for her. He's on vacation he's honeymooning with his wife simultaneously with Constance and Oscar at this. And so late one night, they're looking for his wife actually out on the grounds. She seems to have disappeared. She's fine. And he expresses her love, and she says, I don't know in this moment know what to do. And he said, you might begin by reproaching me. And she says, surely it's far too late in the evening for that. I've just enough strength left to question your timing. And he says, there's never a good moment. And she says, yes, but might we agree that your honeymoon is rather spectacularly bad? Which just leads me to a much broader question about dialogue, which is, I'm always interested in a historical fiction writer, how much they feel almost like you're acting it out, like are you talking it out loud to yourself, or, and maybe these aren't, contradictory, are you just really, really there and immersed, and you're in that space and time?
That's an excellent question that I've never asked myself. So I do talk out loud, much to the consternation of my family, I should say. Over the year, my kids are long since learned that, they hear me talking. And my husband said, the only difference this time is you're talking in an English accent. So I read stuff out a lot. And if it makes me laugh, I keep it. If it makes me cry, as this book often did, I keep that too. But I also immerse myself in the literature of the period. And I do something as mechanical. I will, Shaw was writing around this time. And who else? And so I will sometimes just underline idioms that feel Victorian, and I will just circle them and check in now and again. But inevitably, you're not really writing. I'm not really writing a 19th century novel with this one, because that would be a meaningless stunt and it would be unreadable, I think, at some level. So it's some hybrid of present and past. David Mitchell once referred to the process as antiquing. You take sort of a present-day statement and then you give it a gloss.
Right. You walk into a modern living room full of nicely placed antiques.
Yes.
Yeah. The fact that you're talking out loud to yourself in English accents proves that you are very much acting it out, too.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody have a question for Lou out there? Don't be shy. Right here.
I was a little surprised when you said that sort of your first introduction to Wilde was The Picture of Dorian Gray, because I certainly read The Happy Prince and The Nightingale as a child, and also my gateway to Wilde was really The Canterville Ghost, which I found
love that
enchanting.
story. Yeah. No, it's funny. I don't think I read those stories as a kid, but he wrote most of them for his own kids. That shows kind of what kind of father he was.
The first two she mentioned are children's stories.
Yes, The Happy Prince.
The Happy Prince is actually better than Different Fungus.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Happy Prince. Wow. Yeah, very good about the what love does to somebody. Yes, and also The Selfish Giant. And he wrote these stories for his own kids. And actually, Cyril recites from The Selfish Giant at some point in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's somebody over there in the yellow shirt.
Hi. Since finishing the book, have you gone back and reread any of Wilde's works and come away with a different perspective on them?
I would say in the course of writing it, I read a lot of Wilde stuff. Now, I haven't gone back to him since. I was sort of done. When you're done, you're done. And so you get to the end of this, and it's like, all right, next. I mean, I go back to the importance of being earnest. And one of the things I learned is that he was writing this as his whole life was falling apart. The Marquis of Queensberry was closing in, was making public scenes, and yet he managed to produce this immaculate, delightful farce that seems to float almost free of reality. Maybe that was maybe it was an escapist impulse in his kind. So the fact that he was able to produce that masterwork in such distraught moment really amazed me about him. Yeah. He was a worker. He was a worker bee.
What have you got percolating in your creative mind right now?
I am not at liberty to say, but I'll tell you why I'm not at liberty to say. So I can share this story, right? This is Annals of Publishing, Volume 38. 3 days before the Wildes came out, my publishing team was fired. So as a result, I am an orphaned author for the second time in my career. And that means things are a little bit up in the air. So my agent and I are working on another idea, but we can't yet reveal it. It'll probably be Victorian.
You mentioned, I can imagine you don't want to really say anything until something's really underway and you really feel confident that it will come to fruition. But when you're writing, like your brother talking to you about Mandeville, do you have a circle of trusted readers? How many people look at stuff as you're writing, and do you have to finish a draft before you show it to somebody?
I think I must have trust issues because I don't really have that circle.
You said that so delightfully, though. I have trust issues.
I don't really have that circle. I know people, writers, there may be some here, who have writers' groups and swear by them because it's a wonderful community and it gives you incentive to keep putting out more pages. I tend to huddle over it until I feel like it's ready to be seen. And then I'll show it to agent and editor if the editor is already in place. But no, I go away with it and sit with it for a long time. But that's just me. That's just me being kind of weird.
I don't think that's weird at all.
In your research, do you do much traveling? Like, for instance, did you follow Wilde to Paris or
Yeah.
something like that?
I used to do traveling. I used to be really smart about setting books in places where I wanted to travel to. London, let's go. Paris. In this case, there are 4 different locations, from Norfolk to Italy to France and London. So I didn't feel I could. I knew I couldn't afford to do that, and also it was a time issue. I had to get the book done. But I fall back on the rationale that I mentioned earlier, that I'm going to learn more just from reading stuff. I have a study shelf at the Library of Congress, which is 6 blocks from my house, so that's an amazing resource. And
Wait, what do you have there? A study?
study shelf. It's right off the main reading room. You can rent a study shelf, and you can keep books there. Normally, if you take out a book at the Library of Congress, you have to return it that same day.
Right.
A study shelf allows you to hold on to it indefinitely. So
That's
pretty great.
cool.
Yeah.
Learned something new today.
Very lucky.
Have you been in Norfolk ever, or did you go?
I've not been to Norfolk. No, I wish. No, Virginia. Yeah.
Hi, I don't really have a question, but it's kind of a comment, and I would ask you to revisit your witch book. And because
It's a demand, really.
Yeah, no, I just, because I think of the best historical fiction tells us about where we are now. And so I think we're in a moment where a story about what happens to a transgressive woman could be interesting. So maybe something will bubble up.
Maybe something will bubble up. I think part of it is that the Puritans are hard. They're weird. They're really weird. I mean, we're a lot closer to Elizabethans than we are to Puritans. They lived in a supernatural world. They thought Satan literally walked the earth and was actively recruiting, sleeper cells of witches in every town, and that's the world they lived in. So it's hard to travel there. I mean, I read the Scarlet Letter just for research, and he did a great job. But I think it's partly because he was not too far removed from Puritans at that point.
That's interesting.
Hi. I bought the book online this morning, but I haven't yet read the book. I'm really looking forward to it. When I read a book, I like a lot to look at how the language and the descriptions and the imagery reinforce themes of the book. And the way you all talked about the book here, the dialogue, the humorous dialogue about a real man would be able to expel his cough quickly, and then the description of Wilde's son who felt shamed by his father's exposure, having to prove his masculinity. And it made me wonder whether, besides obviously trying to provide insight into this great writer and this time and era, if you had themes in your book and what those were that you tried to bring out, or
Do I have themes? There are themes in the book. I'm not necessarily aware of them as I'm writing it. And I almost think that would be a little deathly to be thinking, I will now write a book about this. The theme of this book is this. I'm usually animated more by the characters and their situations. So, and I feel like that's something to leave to readers to kind of decide what the themes are. And often I'm educated by readers who find things in there that I didn't know were there. I think it was after the 5th book, somebody said, "Why do you keep writing about alternative families?" It's like, holy shit, I didn't know I was doing that. But it was right. So the theme issue, for me, the story is what takes primacy, and the themes are just there to be found.
But as a reader, I'll take a stab because you're interested. There are very rich themes in this book. One of them is there's a line toward the end about what parents don't tell their children and what they keep from them. There's a lot of family communication theme. And there's also just a very profound theme about how people can love each other and make their lives together when they change and when the world is an unsteady place. How you can remain loyal and find some kind of happiness in that anyway.
That sounds good.
Those are a couple of them.
How smart I sound.
But there are others, much, much smarter in the book. Anybody else? Nobody? You will be signing
Yes,
in the pavilion
somewhere
on this beautiful day.
I'll let you guys know.
Okay.
She will let you know. So go get Lou sign your book.
Nancy's pointing that way.
And join me again in thanking Lou for being here, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you all.